Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. I'd like to think I'm pretty brave when it comes to heights. Like, I'm fine with being high up, although I do get vertigo constantly for literally no reason. I think I like to be up high, or I like the idea of being up high so I can see everything, but I do get very shaky. Am I afraid of heights? I will get back to you on that. In the meantime, let's go to Miami Beach. Miami Beach, Florida is an affluent area and a popular vacation destination, and with that, unfortunately, comes a fair amount of crime. The beachfront property is home to multi-million-dollar high-rises and condos that have sophisticated security measures in place, and the residents, for the most part, feel very safe. I mean, if you live on the 57th floor of a building where you have to access the front door from the inside, you'd probably feel pretty safe, right? I mean, when you're paying this much, you hope the security system is good. Because of this made buildings like this the top choice for residents and visitors alike, looking for permanent and short-term rentals. And for the most part, it was very safe. Then, here and there, things would start to go missing. A bracelet here, a necklace there. First, only once in a while, but started happening more and more frequently. When these incidents were reported to the management staff, security cameras were poured over, but they didn't find anything going on out of the ordinary. Building staff was questioned, but there really wasn't anything to be found out. Residents and guests began suspecting that their housekeepers might have been behind the missing items, but they really didn't have any proof. None of the victims' units had any signs of a break-in or forced entry, so anyone coming or going would have had to have a key or happened upon unlocked apartments. Thefts continued to be reported, but with no physical evidence of a break-in and no footage of a culprit being caught on camera, complaints continued to stack up with no clues or resolution. But on November 3rd, 1996, Miami Beach police seemed to get a break. Several units of the same apartment building had been broken into and robbed on the same night. The thief came in with a mission and made a point to only steal cash and jewelry. All the victims had told police that their units were locked and no one else would have had a key to their apartment. There was something that all the victims had in common, though. When asked if any of them would always keep their balcony doors locked, they all said no. This was a high-rise, and being so far up off the ground, it was very unlikely that someone would have been able to access these balconies by using a ladder. Since some of these units were 30 stories up, there had to have been another way the culprit got in. When investigators went outside to check the balconies for clues, there was nothing obvious to point to a break-in. As they were making their way back inside, one detective noticed something on the sliding glass doors. He saw a handprint, but not like a palm print. It was what they call a half moon print, which is when you're looking in a window and you use your hands to make a shadow so you can look inside. Once they found this, investigators went to the other broken into units, and sure enough, they found the same prints on their sliding doors too. Okay, so we've definitely confirmed that someone was on the outside of the balconies looking in, but how would they have gotten up there? One of the detectives looked over the balcony and saw what was unmistakably a handprint. They looked around for more of these scuff marks and prints, and found several on the railings of other balconies. This led them to believe that someone had actually scaled the walls up to these balconies and were somehow able to pass through the 12-foot spacings between other units' balconies. Police didn't find any evidence that the culprit had used ropes or any type of harness or any climbing equipment for that matter. He literally was just free climbing and scaled this complex with his bare hands. They had never seen anything like this before, and because of his method of entry, he was dubbed the Spider-Man burglar. At this point, the police resorted to getting in contact with police departments in neighboring cities, hoping to find out if burglaries with these characteristics had been reported there as well. Just 2 weeks later in Palm Beach, a complex had reported that 10 units had been broken into and robbed. When police arrived on the scene, the first place they went to look was the balconies. They knew what to look for after being notified by the Miami police and had found clues right away. When they reviewed what had been stolen, the thief had left behind any costume jewelry and only took the real pieces. None of the units had reported that any pillowcases were missing so as to carry stuff out, so we can assume the assailant was able to take and carry everything on their person. Not long after all these reports were being made all over South Florida of jewelry and valuables going missing from high-rises and condos, all saying the same thing. There was no obvious break-in or forced entry, no physical evidence left behind, and only the real stuff was taken. Because these thefts occurred over a 300-mile radius, it was exceedingly difficult to pinpoint a culprit, as the idea that it was someone from the area seemed like more and more of a reach. It would have had to have been someone fit enough to physically pull themselves up over the railings with no ropes or climbing equipment, sometimes higher than 30 stories. Because the culprit was able to slide by and get away with it for so long, there was the fear that he might never be caught. It wasn't until he was caught off guard that everything changed. In a high-rise in Miami, a man woke up in the middle of the night and went to his kitchen to get a drink. He inadvertently saw the thief jumping over the side of his balcony to the unit over. It took him a minute to realize that he had actually caught a glimpse of this guy who the police hadn't even seen, and he was just right there on his balcony. The thief then continued to drop down from balcony to balcony until he was back on the ground. Although he only saw him for a few seconds, the man got a good enough look at him to give police a description in order to create a composite sketch. He said that the man was Black or Hispanic, in his late 20s to early 30s. He looked like he weighed anywhere from 180 to 200 pounds and had a very athletic build. I mean, of course, he would have appeared to be very muscular, which you would expect based on the climbing he's doing. After the sketch was created and distributed, several other witnesses had come forward claiming they too had seen a man scaling the walls of these high-rises with absolutely no climbing equipment, rolling himself onto balconies, moving from unit to unit, using only his body strength. The residents of these apartment buildings started feeling more and more frustrated as they felt the security was severely lacking, considering how much they had paid for their units. Things like this shouldn't happen. Every time someone had heard about another robbery, many people felt that they could be next. living in this constant state of fear of, is my apartment next, was not what they signed up for. You can imagine this was particularly frustrating for people living on the upper floors, as they felt the higher up they went, the safer they'd be. But that was not the case. The culprit had no problem entering a unit on the 3rd floor or the 30th floor. Being high up made no difference, other than it might have taken him just a little bit longer to get up there. Break-in after break-in, with nothing really being done by building security, residents who never locked their balcony doors were upping the security measures on their own. They began installing more advanced locks and more sophisticated security systems, hoping this would be a deterrent. Over a year had passed since Spider-Man's first hit, and police didn't seem really all that much closer to putting a stop to his thefts. In addition to there being no signs of forced entry, many of the thefts were so quick and so clean, many of the victims didn't even know they had been burglarized until several weeks later. Because of this, reports of the break-ins weren't necessarily called in and investigated in the order in which they had occurred, and by the time one was called in, another break-in was reported more than 200 miles away. This made it exceedingly difficult to pinpoint the thief's location. There were also victims that had no idea they had been broken into at all, since they might have had a housekeeper who wiped down the glass doors and windows and only realized that they had been broken into when they noticed that a specific piece of jewelry was missing, and they reported it then, even though it could have happened weeks to months earlier. Police thought that if someone was stealing high amounts of jewelry, they must be trying to move the pieces quickly. Police then visited several pawn shops in the area, hoping the culprit had come in and tried to sell pieces, but he hadn't. In early 1998, police began noticing a pattern to the robberies. They took another look at every report that had been filed and re-interviewed every victim and witness. Initially, they thought that the thief only stole jewelry and in some cases cash, but of the 50 victims interviewed, many had said that their credit cards had gone missing too, and at the time, they didn't realize it. It was only when they had gotten a bill from the credit card company that they saw the slew of charges that they knew they didn't make. Because the news reports had only said that jewelry was taken, the victims might not have known that the charges on their credit cards had been related, so none of these reports went to the police. Instead, the victims called and sorted it out with the credit card companies. They didn't know of this connection because, again, it wasn't reported, and most didn't know exactly when their credit card had been taken. Some had thought that they lost it themselves. This was a significantly more useful tip because finally, it was something that was traceable. In the span of 2 weeks, several charges totaling over $10,000 were made at a custom auto body shop where the buyer had ordered custom gold and silver rims for a green Ford Explorer. Luckily, the shop owner vaguely remembered who made the purchase. The auto body shop records had shown that he had returned several more times to make additional tire and rim purchases. The most valuable lead at this point was the green Ford Explorer, and police sent out detectives at all hours in search of this car. Several days, working 24 hours a day, and this car was nowhere to be found. They did find that one credit card bill had several charges to a particular gas station in the Miami Lakes area. Officers spent more than a month waiting around the corner from this gas station, and finally, they saw a green Ford Explorer with rims matching the description roll in. As the driver stepped out of the car, the officers looked at each other and were like, "This can't be our guy." The eyewitness description had said that he looked to be between 180 and 200 pounds and had a very athletic, muscular build. They felt that the man that had stepped out of this car was too heavy to be able to pull himself up over railings and scale these condos' walls. Although frustrated, they did decide to follow this man since the vehicle matched. Who knows, maybe he was borrowing it. The car eventually pulled into the driveway of a house in the Oakland Park area. The officers had waited on the street and watched the home. A short time later, another man emerged, and he fit Spider-Man's description. He was the right height and weight and looked to be very athletic. The police felt that this was their guy. He ended up getting in and driving off in a different car than the green Ford Explorer. The officers proceeded to follow him as he stopped at 2 different homes in the Dade County area. Police called in the addresses of both the homes and found out that they were owned by the same person, a man named Derek James. Once they knew his name, they ran a background check and discovered that he had 18 prior felony convictions, including one for stealing over $25,000 in jewelry in 1994. In the case file for that conviction, the officer had written in the comments that he had what appeared to be paint or some staining on the front and sides of his shirt, which made it seem like he was sliding against a wall. This might indicate that he had been climbing way before then. They also discovered that in the 1980s, he had trained as an Army paratrooper and was very experienced with parachuting down from pretty high distances, which would explain how he was confident with being up so high. Investigators continued to follow him, and when they felt they had enough evidence that Derek was the one responsible for committing all of these robberies over the span of several years, they were easily able to obtain a court order to put a tracking device on his car. Working in shifts, they always had eyes on him. On June 21st, 1998, police got notice that Derek was on the move and quickly made their way on the road, hoping to catch him wherever he was going. He ended up pulling into the parking lot of the Bristol Towers condos. The security at this complex was significantly more advanced, as this location had succumbed to robberies before. The officers watched from their car as Derek effortlessly hopped a fence and made his way around the building. Once out of view, officers quickly jumped out of their car to follow him. Once behind the building, Derek was gone. They couldn't believe that they lost him. He was just right there. The 2 officers went in different directions, hoping whichever way he went, they'd be able to catch him. One of the officers was approached by the Bristol Tower security guard, and as he identified himself, he asked him if he had seen anything suspicious, like a man running around the building. The security guard said, "No, I've been here all night. There hasn't been anything unusual here." The officers then met back up in the front of the building, just in time to see Derek get back into his car and drive away. The officers quickly got back in their car to go after him. Derek must have seen or sensed he was being followed and stepped on it, hoping to lose them on a side street. Very soon after, Derek ended up being pulled over for speeding by a local deputy. When he ran his license, He discovered that in addition to driving with a suspended license, he was also in violation of his parole. He was then taken from his car and placed in the back of the squad car. It was then that the two detectives had pulled up and began searching Derek's car. They ended up finding several small pieces of jewelry, including a bracelet that was engraved with a name, later confirmed to be a Bristol Towers resident. Derek was then charged with 1 count of grand theft and 1 count of burglary. While in court, his friends and acquaintances said they had no idea. He never flaunted his wealth or showed off in any way. They said he just lived a very ordinary life. We know that Derek had 2 homes, but that's not all. He had acquired several additional properties over the years and had made his money by renting them out to tenants. All of his renters said that he was a very good landlord and would always take care of any problems that had arisen. His trial date was then confirmed, and his bail ended up being set at $1 million, which, like, wow, this was most likely to ensure that he didn't skip town and actually showed up to court. He gave an interview from jail and was adamant that they had gotten the wrong guy and he wasn't the thief that they were reporting on. However, once he was in jail, not one report of high-rise burglary had been made since. During the trial, the prosecution had presented evidence that he had committed more than 133 burglaries over 4.5 years, and a Miami jeweler had claimed that he had paid Derek over $800,000 for jewelry over the years, saying it was worth 10 times that, meaning the jewelry stolen over the years totaled more than $8 million. Derek said that this wasn't true, and he claimed that he made the money he used to buy properties at the horse racetrack. The jury didn't buy this. On December 8th, 1998, after 1 week of hearing evidence and witness testimony, the jury found Derek guilty of burglary and grand theft, and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. At the time, Derek was still facing charges in Boca Raton, Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, and Cocoa Beach for theft. During another indictment in 1999, he faced an additional 10-year sentence to be served concurrently. As far as I was able to tell, Derek is still currently incarcerated in the Dale County Jail. Just wow. Let this serve as a reminder to always lock your doors. Even if you are very high up, you can never be too careful. As you know, crazier things have happened. Let me know your thoughts on this one. Do you think his sentence was fair? Are you impressed by how he was able to get in and out of these units? Let me know. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.